Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Association of Black Princeton Alumni Countdown 2020 Conversation. This is the second in our election series, and because we know that interest level and connection is important. On behalf of the Association of Black Princeton Alumni Leadership Team, the board, allow me to welcome all Princeton alumni, all Black Princeton alumni, our friends and our interested guests who've come to join us this afternoon for this conversation. This will be a real conversation in real times that we know that we're all living in. It's the empowerment through the insights from the voice of our vote. And right now today, more than 5 million people have already cast their vote. So we continue to bring conversation with and for each other in this journey. I am Cheryl Scales, a proud graduate of the class of 1984 and your moderator for today. My thesis was actually on Blacks in presidential politics, so it's been close to my heart for many, many years to be involved in this way. Today, I lead the Cheryl Scales Innovation Group, where we propel our clients and communities through innovation, through branding, and through equity access. We're also very proud as a company to have been recognized twice by the Obama administration. So with that, you know why we're here, you know who I am. Please allow me to kick off with an extraordinarily special guest who is joining us. This gentleman is passionate and on the front lines with and for us every day, and proudly representing the state of New Jersey. It is our one, our only, but our very, very close and own Senator Cory Booker. Senator Cory Booker, would you please join us in letting us hear his voice on our call today?
Hello, the Association of Black Princeton Alumni. I am the New Jersey Senator, and I'm Black. I'm not a Princeton alumni, but I'm grateful for you all giving me a few moments to share my spirit with you in these urgent times. I had the privilege of serving with John Lewis. He was this extraordinary giant who also was so humble and so kind and so decent. I had a lot of conversations with him about his life's work, and voting rights were something he often talked about and continued to fight to defend and advance. We know this election there will be a lot of efforts trying to suppress the vote, intimidate the vote, stop us from having a large and vibrant turnout, especially targeted towards marginalized community, towards Black folks. We have to, all of us, take on the urgent responsibility of doing everything we can to protect the vote, advance voting rights, and encourage and energize and excite people to exercise that right to vote, to get out there and vote. So much is on the ballot, so many urgencies. For many Americans, this will be a life or death election, whether they have access to healthcare and affordable prescription drugs, whether they encounter a criminal justice system that is actually just. Of course, from immigration issues to education issues, so much should motivate all of us, whether it's through expanded empathy or an understanding of how these issues impact our lives. We must do everything we can to get folks out. So thank you for your common cause and continued conviction. We have work to do, and you all give me hope and inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Cory. Thank you, Cory, so much for sharing those words. Yes, we are connected here today with inspired conviction for the conversation. And that conversation occurs with a phenomenal panel. I'm very proud to be able to introduce our first panelist as a part of this series this afternoon, our Professor Eddie Glaude. He's a PhD class of 1997, a distinguished professor at Princeton University, the chair of the African American Studies Department, and author of a recent New York Times bestseller, Born Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Professor, welcome. Our next panelist is Andrea Campbell, class of 2004. Andrea is a lawyer, criminal justice advocate, councilwoman, and the first African-American woman to serve as president of the Boston City Council. She is currently a candidate for mayor of Boston. Andrea, welcome. Our next panelist is Tessa Kaneene, class of 2007. Tessa has served at all levels of government, at the local level in the administration of the mayors of Rio de Janeiro and San Francisco, at the state level for the government of Michigan, and at the federal level for Barack Obama and Elizabeth Warren. She is currently a senior advisor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Welcome, Tessa. Our next panelist, Walter Jones. Walter is class of 1985. He is an attorney, international businessman, former senior United States diplomat, and former executive director and chief of mission of the African Development Bank. He currently serves as managing director in Washington, D.C., focused on emerging market investments. Welcome, Walter. Our next panelist is Morgan Jerkins. She's class of 2014. She's an author and editor. She's the editor of Zora Magazine, a culture website for women of color published by Medium, and her debut book, This Will Be My Undoing: Living at the Intersection of Black, Female, and Feminist in quote unquote white America, a collection of nonfiction essays, is a New York Times bestseller, and she's got a new book coming soon. I hope she'll tell us about that. Welcome, Morgan. And our final panelist is Paul Roberts, class of 1985. He is an ordained minister and served as the pastor of Church of the Master in Atlanta. He currently serves as the president of the Johnson C. Smith Theological Seminary, as well as on the boards of the Presbyterian Foundation, Montreat Conference Center, Macedonian Ministry, Inc., and Next Church. Welcome, Paul. Our panel picks up on part of what Cory really started to talk about in terms of voter engagement and voter activation, and there's an element of voter suppression that goes with that. Before we go into fully all of the panel questions, something's on my heart at the moment. I just want to ask each of our panelists just a question. Why do you vote? What does voting mean to you? Andrea, kick us off.
Happy to, and thank you. It is an honor to serve with my fellow panelists and to be here with all of you and the, I think, almost 350 people who are taking the time on a Saturday to join us. Why do I vote? So I vote, one, for our elders, right? Those who have sacrificed and died for me to not only be able to exercise my right to vote, but also to run for office. I vote for my two boys. And if I get emotional, it's because I'm obviously current elected in the city of Boston and running for a larger office. And I know just how important it is to be an elected and to do this work. So I vote for my boys and the next generation. I vote because representation matters. It matters that folks are in positions of power that reflect the stories of the folks they serve, that look like the individuals they serve, and most importantly, not only understand what they might be going through, but have lived what they might be going through, and I think become more relatable because of that. So I vote for a whole host of reasons. I know this panel discussion is going to be long, so I'll leave it at that. But again, thank you to the association for organizing us. Really honored to be here with each and every one of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. Tessa, how do you vote? What does voting mean to you?
Sure. Why do I vote? I first and foremost vote for my ancestors. This weekend marks 59 years since my grandfather in Uganda gathered with other leaders to draft the Constitution for Uganda. And exactly a year after that, they established the first democracy, gained independence from Britain, and he had the opportunity to serve in the first cabinet. And now, almost 95, is the last surviving member of that cabinet. And in that experience, which very soon after they had these beautiful plans of democracy and progress and visions, was overturned, and folks of that cabinet were incarcerated and exiled, and the country spiraled into genocide. So when I think about all the leaders across the world that have fought and thought of democracy and dreamt of us being here today to be able to dream of a panel about voting, I can't imagine. When I think of John Lewis, with whom I had the opportunity to collaborate with, even up until the last few weeks of his life on his final documentary, beaten and arrested so many times, I can't imagine letting that torch drop or not executing my fundamental right to vote. And the second reason in which I vote, I feel like is though for those that it's not lost on me that our democracy is still imperfect. And so the folks that, it's not just those that came before us, but those among us that don't have that opportunity. I vote for those who have been wronged by the criminal justice system, that have been stripped by their right to exercise that one tool in which to be able to correct some of the policies and the systems for which led to their situations. I vote for those like my parents who have benefited as immigrants to this nation and that have provided so much in industries from medicine to business to technology, but came here without the right to vote. And finally, I vote for those who are under 18. We know that that generation has the most at stake. So those who we elect in November, the judges and legislators and executive leaders, have such a power to be able to change the lives of the human experience of that generation until the end of time. So I'm less compelled by the idea that my vote is my voice, and more so that how can my vote be a representation for the voiceless? And so when I think about voting in that manner and the impact that it can have on so many people's lives, it deepens my mission and my purpose to not only exercise my right to vote, but also to inspire others to do the same.
Thank you, Tessa. Eddie, Professor.
Well, thank you so much, Sister Cheryl, and thank you to the ABPA for organizing this panel. I really am excited about the conversation. Two quick things. Why do I vote? It's the exercise of the people's power. It is critical to how we understand our place in a democratic republic and what we can do in order to affect the way in which we live our lives, to hold power accountable. And then the second aspect of it is that, in the exercise of the people's power, we try to make choices that could bring about a more just world. Right? That the vote is always it has to be understood instrumentally, not as an end in and of itself, but as a means to bringing about the New Jerusalem, as Jimmy Baldwin invoked, or the beloved community, right? So we exercise the vote on behalf of the good and the just, and in the name of love. That's how I think about it in those two aspects.
Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. As you're giving your thoughts, and as I asked Paul to come on and give his perspective as well, I encourage our participants to put in chat, why do you vote? And what does voting mean to you? Or to go to our ABPA Facebook page and put up your thoughts there if you're affiliated with the page. Paul, give us your perspectives. Why do you vote? Why does it matter to you?
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I echo real gratitude for ABPA for doing this work, presenting this panel. It's meaningful and significant, and I pray that it will have a ripple effect in the weeks moving forward. I vote for a number of reasons that have already been articulated. I vote because I'm angry. And if I can be totally candid, and meaning no disrespect to anybody, I am pissed. And I need an effective way to channel those emotions. And voting is one of the means by which I can do something with my righteous indignation. Black lives matter, but history indicates that Black lives matter more in this country when we vote. So that's why I vote.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the depth of your passion and what you shared with us today. I also move now to Morgan. Morgan, why do you vote? Why does voting matter?
I'm just going to echo a lot of the same sentiments as the other panelists. Voting matters to me because whenever I walk into a gymnasium or a cafeteria, I realize that I'm staking my claim in the future. And I'm thinking of my ancestors who risked their lives or lost their lives to cast a vote. I think of those whose lives are more vulnerable and less privileged than my own. And to echo what Paul said, I'm angry. I have a lot of my sentiment, especially with the way the news cycle is rolling nowadays, it oscillates a lot and it's been very overwhelming. But I've been very inspired by all of the mobilizations that's been happening over the country. And I want to do what's right. I want to show that I'm an active participant in the society. And even though I am far from the government, the United States government over in DC, I matter. And I want to be involved in who's going to be leading this country.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Morgan. And Walter, would you please share with us, why do you vote? What does voting mean to you?
Sure. Again, I fully support all the comments that have been made thus far, and I don't want to repeat any of them, but I vote, I take it very personally because Black people built this country, and I'm an American, it's my country, and I'm going to participate in the direction that it's going. Plus, I vote for very personal reasons for my great-grandmother who was a slave in Georgia, in Griffin, Georgia, to be precise. And I'm also voting for my mother's great-grandfather who fought in the Massachusetts 54th. And they did not shed blood, sweat, and tears so that I could be so callous and ignore what they sacrificed and not vote. And I also want to set a good example for my children and make sure that they vote, at least my daughter who is of age to vote. So it is my right, and I plan to exercise that right as I've done for every election for which I have been eligible to vote.
Thank you, Walter. And let me add my perspective. I vote because of the role models that I saw growing up in my community in Memphis's historic Orange Mound, 9 generations deep, where we walked across the street with my mother and my father before I was even able to vote. They took us hand in hand, all 4 of their children as a family, so that we could see what it meant to go and vote and make your voice count. And that role model lived with me in my fingers, in my DNA, in my movements, in my thoughts, that propelled me, as I mentioned, to be able to go to Princeton University and write a thesis around Blacks in presidential politics when no one could believe that could be possible. And then to see it round down and manifest, that we see President Barack Obama elected not once, but twice. Voting matters for the change at transformational levels, at big audacious goal level, but it matters at the local levels and up and down the ballot too. And that's why I vote as well. Thank you, panelists, for giving those insights. Thank you to all of our participants for sharing your thoughts in our panelists, in our chat around why you vote as well. It's robust, it's real. We love seeing your thoughts, so please continue to share those. Let me move now into a part of the conversation though for voting that was mentioned in part of that from each of our panelists, but we want to go to the history of voting rights. And Professor, would you add perspective to this? The history of voting rights, especially in the Black community, has so much deeper history and complexity. We'd love you to kick off by providing us some context and understanding around the history of voting rights and access for the Black community here in the U.S. and current manifestations of some of the voter suppression. And then we'll move into other thoughts with the panels. If you could give us some context, Professor, it would be phenomenal.
Sure, I'll try to do it in a very compressed way because there's a long history, right, in so many ways. And we want to begin with just a basic claim that democracy in the United States has always been shadowed by the exception regarding the place of Black folk in the body politic. It has always been the case. The question of what will be the role of these formerly enslaved people has haunted the nation, especially since the Civil War. I mean, think of Walt Whitman's, for example, Leaves of Grass, right? You have a character in the poem that is initially anti-abolitionist, but by the time Whitman publishes the last edition of the poem, he's redacted every reference to Black people out of the poem. Why? Because Whitman was anti-slavery, but he was firmly against the idea of extending citizenship to Black people. He thought that we were barbarians and baboons, incapable of exercising the burden of citizenship, right? Or you think about the white supremacy campaigns in the late 19th century. And I bring this up because of what happened recently in Michigan, right? We want to understand that this is not an outlier, that this is just simply the latest iteration of white supremacist efforts to hold on to the idea that this is a white nation in the vein of old Europe. We can think about the Wilmington, North Carolina coup in 1898, when white supremacists violently overthrew the local government. We can think about this in the context of redemption, right? Redemption are those Southern politicians who were committed to white supremacy, who allied themselves with Bourbon Democrats, who sought to reinstate, right, this idea of white supremacy as the guiding ideology. There were the redeemers of redemption, and now we're facing the new redeemers of our current moment. We need to name our opponents for who they are, right? This is the process, in some ways, part of the process of so-called redemption, when white supremacists in the South and throughout the nation violently enforced the second-class status of Black people. So as one writer put it, referring to the Wilmington coup in 1898, quote, "Whiteness eclipsed the legal citizenship, individual rights, and equal protection under the law that Blacks were guaranteed under the 14th Amendment." So when we think about redemption, when we think about the Wilmington coup in 1898, it has everything to do with what are these Black folk doing? How are they seen as a part of the body politic? How do we limit their participation in the life of the country? So there has been an ongoing effort, trying to be quick here. There's been an ongoing effort to ensure that this place remains a white nation in the vein of old Europe, so much so that the late Harvard political theorist Judith Sklar went as far as to say that the United States did not become a genuine democracy until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Now think about this in the context of what happened in 2008 with the election of Barack Obama. Barack Obama's election and the massive turnout of Black voters and the demographic shifts in the country that underlie, right, generated a panic. There was a panic at the root. And what have we seen since then with regards to voter suppression? I think is a direct result of that panic. We have to see much of what we're experiencing today as an extension of the Supreme Court decision in 2013 in Shelby County v. Holder. Now, what did I just say earlier? The white supremacy campaigns of 1898 had everything to do with responding to the 14th Amendment and the extension of citizenship rights to Black folk, the right to vote. Here we are in Shelby County, right? What did the court say? Said that the Section 4B exceeded Congress's power to enforce what? The 14th and 15th Amendments. Still battling that question. And when we see what the court did, that the Supreme Court struck down the coverage formula in that case in a 5-4 decision and reasoned that the coverage formula was out of date, despite Congress's determination that it was still needed. And the ruling, in effect, rendered that section of the Voting Rights Act inoperable. It gutted it. And immediately we saw what Texas did. We saw what Alabama did. We saw what North Carolina did. We saw what Wisconsin did. Voter ID laws, voter suppression, right? All of this is a direct result of Shelby County v. Holder, which is connected to the panic at the root of the election of Barack Obama, but it's at the root of the country. These folks still want to believe that America ought to be a white nation in the vein of Europe. And so they need to, shall we say, constrain and limit the power of Black voters, especially if we turn out in massive numbers.
Big professor, teach to us this afternoon. I love it. I love it. You are so insightful. You said panic at the root. Panic at the root of voter suppression efforts. I'd love to hear from our panelists. What's their perspective on voter suppression from their view? Let's go with Paul. Let's start with Paul. Give us your perspective. I mean, Professor schooled us this afternoon. I love it.
Yeah, I'm ready to shout after that, Doctor. So I'm trying to parse a lot of stuff about suppression activities. At the heart of the matter for me is the issue of profit. And in order for this system to work, there are people at the top, and there are people who are not at the top. And for me, the way I am trying to think of matters of equity and diversity and access, I can't do so. I can't wrap my brain around any of those without first dealing with the nature of our economy, the way our economy works, and the way people are oppressed in order to ensure that profits are created and sustained and maintained at the top. And so voter suppression, to me, the way I'm thinking of it, is it's a weapon among many weapons that help to provide for the economic needs of this country. And because of the priority that I have, particularly as a person of faith, around spreading good, doing good, the common good, I think it's incumbent upon each of us to fight voter suppression with every ounce of resource that we have at our disposal.
Thank you, Paul. Tessa, your perspective, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I absolutely agree with what Professor Glaude and Walter have provided. When I think about the ways in which voter suppression typically manifests itself, especially in media, it's a lot around election season, right? It's about voter ID laws, it's about ballots, it's about polling locations. But I feel the deepest forms of voter suppression actually happen on the off season through our methods of gerrymandering. You know, the manipulation of maps, the recalibrate the weight and the power of a single vote. And every 10 years, our legislators have the power or the ability to abuse the power to redistrict. And what that means is they can do certain things like what we call crack the vote, crack a community, which means that they can eliminate a political majority in an area, or they can pack the vote on the opposite side, where they can almost guarantee a political majority. And the reason why this is so important is because again and again, you see states where the person who has the overwhelming number of votes in a state doesn't win the state because they don't win the number of districts. And I say this because in our last iteration of the census, we're in a census year now, of course, in 2010. In 2011, our legislators had the opportunity to do that. We had 2 Republican-led houses, and they had the opportunity to redistrict. So all these elections, our election of 2016, very memorable, 2018, and this election right now, we're still operating within the lines and districts that were drawn in 2011. So we have a really exciting moment right now. Those who vote into power in November will be able to go through that exercise next year to be able to hopefully draw lines that are more fair. Because when drawn unfairly, what happens is that voices are uncounted and that there is a suppression of voters. So I call upon all of us to think about this election as an opportunity to make sure that the work that is done, not just in election season, that's happening all the time, is one that we can make sure that we are paying attention to, and that it is the work that we know that is happening. So let's be mindful of who we bring into power, who are going to redo those districts, and how are the ways in which our votes can be counted, will be suppressed, or be identified.
Thank you, Tessa. Morgan, your perspective, please.
When I think about voter suppression in the year 2020, it's nauseating, for lack of a better word. I mean, the way that I started learning about it, just recently, I just looking at all the states that are crucial states or battleground states or states that have history of these sort of things going on. For example, Florida. I mean, I donated recently to the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition because there are things put in place now where anyone who has a felony conviction, they have to pay off the fees, the fines, the restitution first. But the problem is every county clerk has their own system, and sometimes it's hard to find how much you're owed or the records don't exist at all. I remember it was last month, President Trump went on Sean Hannity on Fox News and he talked about how he wanted to have sheriffs and law enforcement to be at these particular poll centers, or even in Texas, right? Last week, the Republican governor, Greg Abbott, he wanted to order counties to close extra drop-off sites for absentee votes until they only have one each. Think about Harris County, Texas. That's millions of people. Now, granted, luckily within the past, I think 24 hours or so, a federal judge barred that. But the fact that that was even an initiative by the administration to stop people from going there, or just to make sure that certain votes were not counted. So I agree with Tessa and other panelists. Like, we have to pay attention to what's going on, not just in Florida, not just in Texas, but also in other places like Pennsylvania, for example, as well, to be mindful of what's going on and donate. As I said, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition is one of them. Pay attention to text banks that are going on, texting parties that a lot of people are organizing, and just to inform your mamas and your aunties and grandparents, because a lot of my family members, as many other Black families, they're spread out all across the country, and to let them know to just be on guard as best as they can.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Morgan, for that human, real, and just sense of transparency in what you shared. Thank you for sharing that with us. Walter, can you give us a perspective on voter suppression?
Sure. I see it as multi-layered and multifaceted. There's certainly the historical perspective that Professor Glaude elaborated on, and one could perhaps say that as time went on, the efforts became more subtle and more insidious, perhaps. You went from having obvious laws that were clear and discriminatory to more subtle means of voter suppression. And I want to focus on perhaps an economic thread and kind of pick up what Paul was referring to. When I look back over recent history, last 10 years or so, to me, and I'm a lawyer by training, so I see the legal precedents as having a dramatic impact as they've had over the years on voter suppression and access to voter rights. And there was a case in 2010, the Citizens United case, that for all intents and purposes, well, effectively it gave corporate businesses the right of free speech, and allowed them to spend unlimited amounts essentially to influence politicians. In my view, it was legalized corruption. And I think from that point forward, voter suppression took on an extremely, in addition to the more overt efforts, more of an economic attempt to segregate those who have the wealth and the means to influence politicians, those who we've elected to represent us, and to do so with zeal and to the best of their efforts. And it watered down our influence as voters to the extent that we do not have the same degree of access to capital. And so I think that over time, and in 2014, I think there was a progeny to Citizens United. I think it was the McCutcheon case or something like that. And what it did, it allowed those, let's just call them the 1%, to have a greater impact or influence over how laws are made. And I think that those without the economic means, which unfortunately encompasses a lot of the Black community, were left with an illusion that their vote had equal weight in that context. And I used to work in the United States Senate, and I could see very clearly those who had access to the senator and to the legislative process directly were those who had given considerable amounts economically, had made large capital contributions. And those who did not saw me. And obviously I was at least a few steps removed from the senator in my ability to influence legislation. And I think Citizens United in 2010 really cemented that demarcation. And it effectively diluted the influence that we have that I see as another way of voter suppression. If you want to put it in a very crude historical context, since I'm not a historian, it created individuals with a vote, a full vote, those that had the economic means to purchase influence so that their vote actually directed someone or a legislator to vote in a certain way, or those whose vote was less, almost like the 3/5 compromise. And I think that the impact is effectively voter suppression, that my vote, because I don't have the same access to wealth as others, now counts for less. It's less influential. And in my book, that's a way of stifling my voice and preventing my interests from being considered along with those of other constituents, because those other constituents are able to not only vote, but add capital, add money behind their vote to get greater influence. And at the end of the day, I believe at least that tremendously impacts us negatively, because we'll get the lip service that our interests are listened to, but when the caucuses take place behind closed doors, and again, I've been in and witnessed some of those, our interests are not held with the same degree of weight as those who've been able to back it with financial means. So again, I see voter suppression taking on many different layers and contexts, and we cannot forget the economic aspect of it.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you so much for that insight on that economic perspective to the conversation. Andrea, would you round us out on this particular question and give us your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think if anyone was confused as to whether or not voter suppression is real, well, just rewind this tape, right? It is real. And it is all, of course, rooted in a historic, in a history that wanted to, of course, keep Black people marginalized and in an inferior position. And so, of course, I am often telling folks here in the progressive state, and I'll put that in quotes, of Massachusetts, that voter suppression is real, but not just in southern states, and telling folks that there is intentional efforts and strategies happening every single day to marginalize and to ensure that those who are formerly incarcerated do not vote, those who are Black and low income do not vote. And so I'm often telling folks up here, there are numerous ways that you can get involved in many states, whether it is donating your resources, volunteering your time to call voters, to turn them out, numerous ways to get involved. And so I hope many folks who are listening to this do just that. Two other points that I want to make. Here in Massachusetts and in the city of Boston, we also see efforts with respect to voter suppression, and they do show up differently. One is just lack of information. There's an election every single year in Massachusetts, but if you were to go around and ask the average person in the city of Boston, they wouldn't know that. My district that I currently represent is predominantly a district of color in the city of Boston with over 70,000 residents. And I remember when I first ran, I looked at the numbers. I said, okay, over 70,000 residents, predominantly district of color. Wow, we got a lot of power here. To my shock, there were over 30,000 that were registered to vote. So it tells me they came out at some point. But less than 10,000 usually show up. And in some elections, you had 2,000 people or less show up to an election. And I think everyone is understanding the importance of local elections and how we touch every facet of your life, especially as the federal government is trying to figure it all out. So I think for me, it's always been critically important to provide people with just basic information, but also making it easier. What does it mean to have early voting? We have it in some elections, not all elections. What does it mean to have same-day registration? What does that look like? How do we, right here in this progressive state of Massachusetts, or progressive Commonwealth of Massachusetts, change that? And then the last piece that I think is also critically important, and I think it connects to Walter's point, which is critically important, about this illusion. There are many voters in the city of Boston, I think across the country, who will not vote in the presidential election. We can tell them about the moral reasons as to why it's important, the economic reasons. If you're an immigrant, your family can be ripped apart, or if you know an immigrant, your family can be ripped apart, your community. Obviously, you can die from COVID-19 and still people won't come out because they do not think their vote matters. And there's something to that. And I do not think electeds or Democratic parties or Republican parties or any party really, I think, gets at that distrust that exists within communities, especially communities of color, that we need to turn out in this presidential election, for example. That distrust is real, and it's based on fact that they think if I vote for you and put you in office, it will not change anything in my life. It won't change my neighborhood. It won't have an impact. And I often have been telling folks, give me a chance. I said that in my first election, give me a chance, I will show up differently. You know, I believe in leading with integrity and keeping my word on the basic things. I tell you, I'm going to call you, I'm going to call you back. I'm going to email you, I'm going to email you back. And so we continue to build trust. We continue to go out into neighborhoods. To my shock, there were some neighborhoods, you know, some folks had lived in the community for 30 years, had never had anyone ever come to their house to ask them for their vote. That is ridiculous, right? No party ever showed up, no elected, no volunteer. And so you can imagine that distrust is almost cemented in some neighborhoods. So there's a lot of work that we have to do to say, I recognize the distrust. I recognize this illusion that is real. But when we show up in large numbers, we really can make a difference. You can put people in office that will keep their word, that will not lie to you, that will carry themselves with integrity and character. And so for me, that's a big piece of this voter suppression conversation as well that I think is critically important.
Thank you, panelists. Insightful. The chat has been busy. Continue to do so. If you have any perspectives around voter suppression, please also feel free to add those there as well. As I move into another question, thousands of races, thousands of candidates up and down the ballots. The argument has been made that we are also voting in this particular season to restore our American democracy. The issues that, some of the issues that highlighted by our panelists have been talked a bit about the dynamics in between, but American democracy appears to be on the line in this particular season. And one recent example, our former First Lady and our very own Princeton alum, Michelle Obama, produced a video recently, which was her closing argument for Biden. Within it, she expressed why people of all lanes, as she noted, should vote for democratic restoration, and that to her means voting for the Biden-Harris ticket. I'm interested from a couple of our panelists for you to give perspective on what elements of democracy do you feel are at stake in this election. I'd love to hear Professor Glaude's perspective and perhaps one other who's passionate about this. You know, what elements of democracy are at stake?
All of it. To be honest with you, the whole thing. What we're witnessing is not only the erosion of democratic norms, but the destabilization of democratic institutions. You know, I'm from the South. I'm a country boy from Mississippi. And, you know, if you leave termites in the floor, you know, over time, the floor, you're gonna have to pull the whole thing up. So there are termites in the floor. We know that now. We know that the executive branch, we've been crying, shouting from the rooftops about the expansion of imperial power, the expansion of the executive branch. Some of us were even crying that during the Obama administration, that the executive branch is out of control, and that if you get someone in that office that isn't committed to democratic norms, all hell's gonna break loose. We've already heard from Tessa about the impact of gerrymandering. How has that impacted the way in which the People's House functions? The Senate, the deliberative body, is broken. We've seen the politicization of the courts, right? We know that Citizens United has done the work that Brother Walter laid out, but we also, Citizens United is also a very clear recognition that the United States is on the verge of being an oligarchy. It might very well already be, according to my colleagues here at Princeton, right? And that the oligarchic move is moving towards an autocratic form of governance, right? So, and then you combine that with even the politicization of the military, right? What we saw with President Trump. So all of this, just really quickly, it is the end result of a 40 years of living under an ideology, political and economic, that has revealed itself to be bankrupt. An ideology that believes that the federal government's only role is to ensure the efficient workings of the economy and the national defense. An ideology that has transformed us from being citizens concerned about the public good to being self-interested persons only in pursuit of our own individual ends in competition and rivalry with others. So much so that liberty is now a synonym for selfishness. Can't even put on a damn mask, right? Because you want to be committed to freedom and liberty. right? So part of what we say that what's on the ballot, right, is an ideology that has proven itself to be bankrupt. Now that means that even if you choose the Biden-Harris ticket, you got to be voting against an ideology that can very well evidence itself even in the people we choose. Uh-oh.
Oh, now.
Uh-oh. We got to do something. We can't tinker around the edges now. I said all of democracy is at stake in this moment. The institutions are teetering on a knife's edge, to use the wrong verb, standing on a knife's edge. This is the task before us, and this is why this election is so momentous in this moment.
Oh, Professor, drop the mic. Drop the mic. That's what I'm talking about. Bring us, teach us, school us, help us, inform us. At any age, knowledge is always power, and truth and real conversation activates. We thank you, we thank you, we thank you. Is there another panelist who has a perspective? If not, I've got a question boiling on my head after hearing Professor talk a little bit about racial justice and the Black vote.
Can I make a comment, Cheryl?
Absolutely, Walter.
Thank you. I want to echo on what the professor said. I've lived in 6 countries, 4 of which were dictatorships, and I've lived through 2 revolutions. And in each instance, instability and an authoritarian regime prospered when the institutions of governance were weak. And they were made intentionally weak by the autocrats who sought to stifle any type of dissent, any difference of opinion, and to effectively kneecap the courts so that there were no challenges, no legal basis for any challenges. And so I agree with the Professor Glaude that every aspect of our democracy is at risk with this president and this administration. I'd like to particularly highlight the judiciary branch and the federal courts and the appointments, which are lifetime appointments at the federal level with individuals. Not only are they grossly incompetent, a meritocracy has ceased to exist with this administration, but they also do not hesitate to infuse within their holdings and their opinions and judgments their own personal political viewpoints and inclinations. And if we get to the point where the very foundations of our institutions are weakened, then it's like letting a virus in that will ultimately destroy our democracy. And I've been in countries, again, where there has been a fledgling democracy in one instance I'm thinking of, and the first order of business during the revolution and the autocrats that took over was to destroy any aspects of strong institutional government that could challenge their authority. And if we don't wake up, that's exactly what's happening here, and we need to put an end to it.
That Walter, thank you for that perspective. That offers that level of intensity described by Professor and yourself will have a far more detrimental impact on the Black community.
Cheryl, could I add a piece? I know you want to move on. Could I add a piece?
Sure.
Like you, I live in Georgia, and I have played and replayed Ahmaud Arbery's lynching. And I have watched that thing just bit by bit by bit, and tried to put myself in that young man's shoes. I live in Atlanta. I run the streets of Atlanta. And I have a brown-skinned daughter and a brown-skinned son and another brown-skinned son, all of whom run. We run the streets of our city. And when we go places elsewhere in Georgia, we find streets to run. What's at stake for me is the safety of these children that my wife and I have born. And we've never been safe, and I make no bones about that. But in this election in particular, if it goes the way I hope it doesn't, I think our safety, our security, our understanding of inherent human value is done. So I have real concern. I heard, I think it was LeBron, say recently that every Black person is afraid. So this doesn't get at the technical aspects of democracy. This is far more elemental. And Dr. Glaude mentioned the public good, the public well-being. Well, this is all about the public well-being, and it's about the safety of everybody who is on this Zoom today, and millions more.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. As a matter of fact, your part of your answer segues into, really a significant amount of racial injustice that we, perhaps many of us on this call, I certainly know I have experienced injustice in just running my everyday life. And the Black vote is part of the power that I believe fundamentally in, and I believe many on this call do as well. But activating it amidst a sea of allies, we've seen, as you mentioned, LeBron, the NFL, the NBA, the WNBA, coalitions in cities across faiths, and parties standing in continuous protest to of this injustice that we are seeing across this canvas, unlike we've never seen. We've seen injustice historically. We can go from slavery to Jim Crow, civil rights, but this has a different canvas impact to it when you can see an Ahmaud be shot down, a Breonna's justice not be fulfilled, George Floyd begging, saying, "I can't breathe." And then we're seeing voices that come to the coalition like Elizabeth Warren and Cindy McCain, enlisted leaders saying, it's on the line. We've got to do this differently. So I would ask any of the panelists who have a point of view to say, what impact do you feel this kind of attention brings to the election season? And does this differ from some of the past that we've experienced? And is that difference significant enough to get to what Professor Glaude described as it's on the line, 100% got to show up? Any perspectives?
I'll speak to this. I do think we are in a unique and profound moment in time. And I think the silver lining in the madness, in the fear, in the death, in the darkness, what Paul was talking about that we are feeling is getting folks to turn out, maybe not to vote just yet, but at least to turn out for rallies, to march in the streets, to say Black Lives Matter, to demand that the police departments in their respective cities and towns do better, that the resources within a police department right here in the city of Boston, we have an overtime budget in our police department of over $70 million. And people are saying no more. We want some of that to go to organizations that have a history of dealing with the root causes of violence, moving people out of poverty, improving our school systems, our transportation systems, creating opportunity for jobs and entrepreneurs and many others to build wealth in the community. And I think this is an opportunity to translate that energy into voting, into turning people out. I will tell you, it will not happen though, of course, organically. We have to put in the work of getting people out to vote. There are a lot of organizations on the ground that are doing that and doing it well. I do think we need to start building greater coalitions. There's still divisions within the Black community. In Boston, it's the elders and the young people. There are some saying, excuse me, young people, you don't have a clue. And the young people saying, elders, excuse me, you're too old, right? It's saying, no, all of us have a role to play. And elders, yes, the wisdom, the institutional knowledge, the street knowledge, all of that. But young people also have their own perspective and experience. They have the drive, the action, and maybe the energy, whatever it is. And I think there are folks now beginning to say, how do we bring Black community together in an authentic way? How do we bring our Latinx community together with our Black community, immigrants with native born, to say we are all in this together. as a way to mobilize folks to get out to vote. And I will say, I'm just going to share something really quickly personally on this, no justice, no peace. I ran for office after losing my twin brother, who died while in the custody of the Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons here in Massachusetts. He was only 29 years old, and he was a pre-trial detainee. And he had a disease called scleroderma and didn't get adequate health care, and as a result passed away. And most folks think about pre-trial detainees in the context of Guantanamo Bay. It happens here in this country. And when I ran, I said, how do two twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes? I could leave here and go to Princeton University, go off to law school, the rest is history. And I have channeled that pain into purpose. There are a lot of young people right now who are looking for ways to channel their pain, whether it's with stories as the one I just shared, of losing someone who is incarcerated or losing someone to gun violence, where they've received no accountability whatsoever. My family still doesn't have a clue what happened to my brother and under what circumstances he died. And yet we are still seeing folks who are ready to turn that pain into purpose. What does it mean to invest in that type of leadership for these folks, and mainly a lot of young folks, right, to take their place in their rightful place? Right now, I think there's a moment to do that across this country. And how do we turn this moment into a movement that is sustained, where we get elected leaders, for example, that will do what is necessary to transform these systems, demand injustice, and of course, where we get more informed citizens to also hold us all accountable to do what we say we're going to do.
Thank you, Andrea. One of the thoughts that comes to me before I move to our next question, and we're going to be moving to Q&A from some of our participants in just a short moment. But one of the things that comes to mind for us to take as a message, all of us, our panelists, all of our on this call, who will go out, is that we must be willing to be, as African Americans, allies in this moment of this election. Historically, if you flash back and you remember anything about our history, it was not always that during the civil rights movement, all civil rights leaders were in agreement and had the same united reasoning at the same time. But they had a higher purpose of defeating the black and white segregation and penetrating through. We are at that moment now, where we must be willing to learn that core lesson at the top of the pyramid and be allies of the moment in this election as Black folks and vote for the change that we know is required. And when the season stops, as Ms. Tessa said earlier, be willing to do the work off of the main election. There is still other work happening. As Andrea said, there's an election in Boston or in Massachusetts every year. But once this is locked up, right, Professor? It's got to be locked up. And then we come forward to start to work on the priority list of issues that are being described. But if we flounder this moment because it's not all locked up, we will devastate, in a way, a level of impact to us that I believe is just beyond measure. Professor, do you agree? Other perspective?
Yeah. I don't think the country can survive another 4 years of Donald Trump. And if the country can't, Donald Trump is an avatar, right? He's not just simply the problem. I mean, we need to see the back of his head. I'm clear about that. But Mitch McConnell, Republicans generally, those who are enablers, right, have made possible this disaster. Now, I think it's important for us to understand that if we are going to prevent I've had to watch my son make a decision, and Morgan and others make a decision to go out here and protest in the middle of a global pandemic that's killing us because police refuse to stop killing us. And if we don't understand that this election is not only about salvaging democracy, but finally ending the fact that our communities are policed like we're still under the slave codes, if we don't stop this right now and stop tinkering around the edges because we're afraid of alienating white folk, my son's children, another generation will have to do this. Another generation of twins will have to go through what Andrea had, what she went through, right? So you're absolutely right, Cheryl. We got to get this done, but we got to do it in the right way. Hold everybody accountable. Everybody must be accountable, even though we know we got to see the back of Donald Trump's head. Right? But everybody has to be held accountable at this moment. That's what I think.
I absolutely agree.
I think I heard Tessa.
Could I sweep in, Cheryl? Is okay? Okay,
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Glaude. I absolutely agree. We have to hold everyone accountable. In addition, we have to have everyone involved. I think some of the things, I echo what Andrea is saying. I hear so many things about the election at the presidential level might be a little bit exhausting or uninspiring for so many folks. But I always like to remind people there are thousands of races that are happening in November, right? That's a big race, but there's so many others. So as we look at down ballot candidates, and I love the introduction that Andrea and others have brought about this moment that we're in, this viralization of Black murder, this horror of a pandemic, this wrestling and reckoning in this moment that we're in. How do we restore our democracy, and how do we promote greater justice? And one of the ways in which we can do that, when folks are saying, oh, I don't think that my voice counts, or what does this election mean to me? I like to remind people all the things they've been thinking and feeling these last couple months. You don't like the way that schools were going virtual or not virtual, your school board's on the ballot. You think about policing, your sheriff's on the ballot. The mayor that you vote for appoints the police chief. You want to think about criminal justice, your attorney general and the judges, they're on the ballot. When you're thinking about these overturnings at the state level in terms of LGBT rights or women's rights or workers' rights, those are all on the ballot right now. And when especially Black folks that are in our community and our beloveds that are thinking about, oh my gosh, but these two old white men, they don't represent me. Listen to this, but how about they don't represent me in Washington. Well, let's think about the Senate, right? So right now, folks that represent us, we have Cory Booker, our friend, and we have Kamala Harris. God willing, he wins his re-election, and Kamala Harris is VP. That leaves one Black person to represent 42 million Black people. In 70 years, we've had 7 Black senators, and this year we have the opportunity to have almost that number represent us at the exact same time. And these elections in South Carolina and Mississippi, they're at a margin right now. There might be won by less than the number of people on this call right now. And so it's no longer a question about Republican versus Democrat, it's non-voter to voter. How do we inspire people? Each of us, if each of us contact one person to do one thing, and it doesn't have to take 10 hours or $10 million. It can be sending a text right after this call. Are all my people registered to vote? Have they verified? Do I know anybody that are in those jurisdictions? If not, how can we contribute? But things like that, I think, are so helpful, knowing that it's okay if you're disillusioned by the presidential process, but know that that ballot does not just list those names, the things that you care about for you, your family, your community are right there represented. So we have to be in this fight, and we have to make sure that we find ways to be able to have our voice be heard. And if you can, then inspire somebody else, right? If you don't feel comfortable working the polls, recruit somebody else on your behalf. If you are not able to make calls, tell your nephew, tell your cousin, tell whoever it is, your coworker. We can all do something, right? Post something for 2 seconds. It's okay, whatever it is. We all have that opportunity. There's no excuse anymore. There's so much information. It's so easy to vote. All the people that everyone mentioned that fought before us to vote, the least we can do is take 30 seconds and think of what can I do in this space in this time. Take those 30 seconds a day, and I think that we have the power to not only change the face of this nation, but like the course of history. And if we can do that together, and we all can propel other people to do that, I think there's something that can build there, and we can build off the great work that other folks have done.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Tessa. I'm going to ask my co-host, our very own Eric Plummer, to look through our Q&A questions and what's come up, and give us our panel a couple of questions from our folks who have been sharing, because Tessa, you're channeling the hashtag good trouble. It's time for us to be in it. I don't know that I've ever thought in my adult life of having to quote unquote make a plan. because prior to that, my ancestors, my folks in the civil rights movement, they did make a plan. They paved the way for us. But we're back now to needing to make a plan. 5 million votes have been already cast so far. Early voting already happening, I think 25 or 29 states. Early voting about to open up on Monday in Georgia and in other states. Make a plan for yourself, for your home. Determine if you're going to still vote by mail or if you're going to vote early and safely with a mask, with some gloves. But do what needs to be done and help do that circle with your circle of folks around you. Make a plan. And if you need help, we're going to provide some resources to websites that can help you verify information around locations for early voting locations and all of those things when we send out our information after this call. But we can do that. We can make a difference. And Professor and Tessa, thank you for sharing those insights with us. Eric Plummer, our very own. Do we have a couple of questions that we can bring in from our folks who participated today, and to all 300 and I believe now 67 plus of you who are participating today? We thank you. We celebrate you for being here to be a part of this conversation. You matter. Our voices together matter. We can be the beginning of putting the plan together and being connected and showing how it can be done. My applause to you. Eric.
Yes, awesome. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited to ask a few of these questions. I think they're extremely insightful from the people watching. So the first question is from, and excuse me if I butcher your name, I apologize, but I believe it's Artilly Wright. She is an elected official in DC, and she's interested in hearing more about the strategies in play to increase voter education, turnout, engagement in local elections during non-presidential years. Turnout is great in presidential years, but even then, many voters only vote for president, ignoring all the other roles and propositions on the ballot that directly impact their daily lives. So really the questions around just non-presidential voting and how do we actually get people to be excited about that?
Tessa, would you take that? You talked a little bit about that in one of your remarks.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you so much, Eric, for the question. I think that is what is necessary right now. How do we go from protest to policy and organizing to understand how we make change? I feel the people closest to the pain, as Diana Press always says, have to be closest to the power. So in these years in between, right now is the time to start thinking about who are the folks running in 2022? Who are the people that we want to lead this movement? We have so much energy and there's so much knowledge. We know better now, so we have to do better. I believe as though one of the things that makes this moment so important is because there are so many positions that people are aware of that they can aspire to. A lot of times on ballots, some of the positions were mentioned before go uncontested. The incumbent will just roll over cycle after cycle, and people don't know that these are lanes and venues by which to make change. So I think that if we have people that are committed to justice, that are committed to good work, that are committed to representing our communities, already thinking about ways in which they can go forth, it's very inspiring. And the reason I say that, one of the things that inspired me very much is we think about this moment as so much about now, but 2014 in Ferguson, right? Those protests lasted for 400 days. Those folks, you know, Brittany Packnett went on to be on Barack Obama's task force for policing, you know, folks in that moment that were just leaders coming out of their living rooms to go out, you know, ran for mayor, became civil rights lawyers, have, you know, run to become judges and made a really strong impact in society. So I think the idea of local elections or elections at any level, whether it be local, county, state, or federal, I think just making sure that we capture this moment. This is such, for better, for worse, the energy that has been of these last few months has been inspiring. It's empowering. We are in such an incredible time to be able to nominate and support and circle ourselves around good leaders. I mean, Andrea is a perfect example of that. And then people think that getting into this game is so small. I'll tell you one small story before I stop that she knows very well, is that the last election that I voted was last December for the Boston City Council. Boston has 700,000 residents. It was won by one vote, and Julia won, right? One vote. And how poetic and powerful is that? Because it doesn't just mean that my vote mattered. It meant that every single person that voted, voice mattered. And yes, that's an outlier, but let us remember that there are so many positions that are not just the Trump and the Biden that have a huge impact on your everyday life. So let's gear up. You know, we are organized now. We have this collection of expertise and energy and fight in our community. Let's get ready for 2022 and 2024 and really.
And 2021. Just have to let's not forget 2021.
Andrea, just drop that in. Drop it in. Drop it in. That's,
You know, that's right, Tessa. Only one vote. That's right. That's right.
Eric, how about another question?
Yeah, so another question that's been upvoted quite a bit here from Morgan Smith. So I hear younger voters my age either say their vote doesn't count or simply they don't believe in the system and want to opt out. Really kind of like, I think, and Morgan's point is she understands their cynicism, but is curious, like, how do we respond, right? Like, how do you immobilize and engage this younger voting populace? And I'm going to jump to Morgan as I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I was like, tag me in. Let me get into this one. Okay, so I kind of want to piggyback off what Andrea said a little bit about intergenerational conflict, because I've seen this type of sentiment happen, especially on online spaces, where you have a certain faction of Black people who are Democrats or who identify themselves as liberal, and they're like, vote for Biden Harris. And for some other faction of younger Black people, they think, oh, well, you think that's going to be the end all be all of change, which is not what anyone is saying. But because it's on the internet space, it takes up this sort of hyperbolic meaning. And so what I would say to the younger voters, I would say honestly, and you can be direct, you can say something like, do these friends that say that they want to vote, do they have uteruses? Do they have people in their lives who they love who have uteruses? Do they have pre-existing conditions? Do they have loved ones who are undocumented? These are things that are at stake right now. And I want to just echo again what Tessa said. We have the chance to nominate and support so many wonderful people. I'm thinking about Cory Bush, who is part of Michael Brown's community. She's a Democratic candidate of Missouri's 1st Congressional District. I'm thinking of Lucy McBath, the mother of Jordan Davis, who's advocating for gun safety. Ayanna Pressley, the Ending Pushout Act, which is trying to stop the criminalization of Black girls in school, and also to categorize COVID data based on race. These are the people that we can pull our weight behind. I understand the sentiment where it's like, I'm tired of the system, because I think about people who I've interviewed who have witnessed the 68 uprising, the 92 uprising, and now the 2020 uprising. These are the, you know, they have grandchildren who are around my age, and they've seen how the trauma has played out in their intimate lives, and they don't want to believe in anything. They just want to be disillusioned. But that's the time to really dig in, because that's a part of what the other side wants us to do, is to just become immediately immobilized and to not do anything at all. So I think to those voters, tell them what's at stake that can affect them personally and also others like them or who are lesser privileged than them, and to let them know that even if Biden and Harris win, God willing, the work is still not done. Nobody is expecting it to be some type of totalizing effect into a utopia. We still have work to do.
Thank you, Morgan.
All right, and then I think our last question, based on upvotes, is really a question more around like allyship. So what is the best way for white Americans to use their privilege to lift up and support Black and brown folks kind of during this time and during this voting season?
Professor.
I just want to say this really quickly. You know, allyship usually breaks down when white folks view racial justice as a philanthropic enterprise. Racial justice is not a charity gesture. It's not something that someone gives, that white people give to others. So how do you be allies? Is that you be very clear about your conception of what a just world looks like, and then you act on it. Right? We don't want crocodile tears. We don't want sentimentality. We want people acting on behalf of a more just world. But if you think that racial justice is a philanthropic gesture, then you're part of the problem.
I'd just like to add that, because that's so important. At least recently, what I've been saying to those who want to be allies, whether it's white folks or even Asian, Latinx, at moments you have to look at what are we talking about? And if, for example, there was a moment in time within the Boston City Council, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. We're talking about the criminalization of Blackness and of Black people in the history of this country. So don't welcome Black folks in just to give you that history lesson. At what point do you allow them to be the leader in the room, to be creating and crafting the policies, the systems reform and change to change that reality? So I have been looking around, whether it's a nonprofit sector, corporate sector, private sector, right? Or political leadership, and looking at the lack of representation. And so what does it mean for any ally to sort of say, wait a minute, maybe I should not be the leader in that moment. I should be taking a step back or stepping to the side and letting the person who is giving you the information and detailing the lived experience or giving you the data and the history also be the leader in that moment. And so I think, oftentimes you see folks welcome you in to have the conversation and tell me more about what you're talking about, how we improve race relations and educational inequities, et cetera, but then refuse to allow you to be the leader that can also be making the change. And I think that's, if you want to show up as a better ally, or some say an accomplice, as our district attorney Rollins here in Massachusetts says, then what does it mean to allow that person to be the leader? And that may mean leading your bank, leading your board, leading your organization, leading a department, or something else.
I want to jump in on this one too, Cheryl. I'm Presbyterian. PCUSA, Presbyterian Church USA, is 90% white. And white people are doing exactly as has just been said. Andrea, right on point. They're drawing Black people into conversation and saying, educate me. And this is the age of the internet and Amazon, and it's not the responsibility of Black people to educate white people. White people can be educated on anything they want to be educated on. Just by virtue of the technology we have at our disposal and by virtue of their privilege, centuries-old privilege. Dr. Glaude has indicated it, and Andrea has indicated it. The need of white people to kind of understand what's going on really centers to me in their patronizing attitudes, and it comes from a place of charity. So when I've been drawn into conversations like that, I am encouraging white people to read, and not just to gather a book club and read a book and consider it an academic exercise and check the box off. I'm encouraging white people to get a handle on the issues of systemic oppression, and not to act. One of the hardest things to endure as a person of color is to see a white person act prematurely. So we don't want to encourage action before white people have been duly equipped with an understanding of what's at stake, what the issues are, and where we might be headed as a nation if we educate ourselves together. We are incredibly miseducated nation. One place to start, since Dr. Glaude hasn't done this.
And that was not pre-planned.
Not pre-planned.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheryl, may I jump in as well? Just very briefly. Do you have a
very
minute?
briefly.
Not a minute,
Very
but a few seconds. I agree with all that's been said. We need allies. Everyone needs allies, but we need allies who truly get it and are genuine in wanting to offer support because they understand the situation. I think the best thing that can happen is that white people engage in some self-introspection, that they look why throughout their history there have been so many instances of oppressing people who don't look like them. Why have they felt the need to create asymmetrical power relationships with them always being on top and unable to accept those who want and deserve equal status, and in many cases are performing in a superior fashion, but are denied the opportunity. So I would like to talk with white people after they've engaged in self-help. I am not here to teach you. That is not why I'm back on this earth plane. You need to engage and have an honest conversation with yourself, and then together we can move forward and try to fix the problems, the many problems that exist.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you so very much. Eric, one more question?
Yeah, one more question. And the last question I have here has been upvoted quite a bit as well. So what happens if we turn out on November 3rd, 20, and reject Trump and elect Biden in a massive historic election, but Trump decides not to relinquish power? How do our votes help then, and kind of where does that leave us?
Just really quickly, no matter what happens in November, buckle up. Whether he loses or wins, buckle up. We have so much work to do. Remember, voting is the last thing you do as a citizen in a democracy, right? It's the last thing you do. So buckle up. We are facing a crisis that the Republic has never faced before, and nothing about November is going to settle it. It's only going to be just one step towards the work that we have to do.
And I would add to that, Professor, for the folks who asked that question, think about what you would recommend the actions be. Let's start our internal list or our list within so that we can be ready, because we may need to be ready. Eric and my ABPA team, okay, I'm volunteering us again. We may need to be ready to do another call. So that we can put the points on this thing. Of action to what the professor has noted, because I do believe it's a buckle up either way. But if people on our call, the 343 or so that are still on here now, have a perspective on what some of those actions should be, put them in the chat, let us know, and let us start building up the plan, because that would need to be done. So I want to thank you all for all of that. Hold tight. I want to thank our panelists. You all are phenomenal. I simply love my Black Princeton folks just bringing it on today. And we also want to close out with two more things, if you'll stay with us. The perspective from one of our Princeton alums who happens to be class of 83, a phenomenal leader, coach, and business person in his own right, and is also first brother, our very own Craig Robinson, who took a few moments to share insights with us. I'd love to play that for you now and then come back and we'll close this out. Eric?
What's up, fam? What a privilege it is to have the opportunity to address the ABPA. Last year, this time, we were thriving, and boy, do I miss seeing all of you in person. I could not be prouder of this organization's steadfast efforts to support African Americans and to help make Princeton a better place for us all. No matter when we graduated or what path we've pursued in life, all of us share a collective pride in our Princeton roots. I speak to you today in the midst of an unprecedented national reckoning with the realities Black Americans have known for centuries. Not all opportunities are created equal. That racism isn't just an individual problem, it's a systemic one. That oppression some believe ended after Jim Crow is still very much alive in 2020. Recently, so many Americans have committed to educate themselves and examine internal biases. The words Black Lives Matter no longer just appear on protesters' signs. They've been painted on murals, written on city streets, stamped on basketball courts, and uttered by allies from every race, gender, religion, and age. For that, I am immensely grateful. But for others, many of our political leaders among them, the goal has been to widen the chasm rather than build bridges. They've conditioned us, quite successfully, unfortunately, to treat those with whom we disagree not as fellow citizens, but as enemies. In many ways, we're more divided now than ever before. Much progress is still to be made. We all recognize the problem, but many of us feel helpless to fight back. We believe that our voice doesn't matter. We buy into the lie that one person alone can't make a difference. To that, I offer just one word of encouragement: vote. Vote. Want to make a statement that bigotry and hate have no place in America? Vote. Want to make your voice heard? Vote. You want change? Vote. Sadly, far too many of us stay at home on Election Day. A Pew Research study showed that just 59.6% of eligible Black voters participated in the 2016 federal election, compared to 65.3% of eligible white voters. Worse yet, just 39% of young adults age 18 to 29, our country's future leaders, historically vote in presidential election years. In a moving essay he wrote shortly before passing away this summer, civil rights icon John Lewis, a personal hero to many of us, affirmed to Americans that, quote, voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society, unquote. It's time we heed Mr. Lewis's words. Casting a vote, not just for the president and Congress, but for local politicians, school boards, judges, prosecutors, and down ballot issues has frankly never been more important than it is now. But it also has never been this easy. A countless supply of voter engagement websites and mobile apps are available instantly at your fingertips. These free, nonpartisan tools take you through every step of the voting process: registering, researching candidates, developing a voting plan, applying for absentee ballots, identifying polling locations, all on your computer or smartphone. My sister's website, whenweallvote.org, does it all. Allintovote.org, a platform my company has partnered with, does it all too. The resources are literally endless. This November 3rd, please vote. Please be a voting advocate to those around you, to your family, your friends, your neighbors, and your professional networks. If you're able, please consider serving as a poll worker or volunteer. Change doesn't ultimately start with new political leaders or ballot measures. It starts with you and me. So be that change. Fight for justice. Make your voice heard. Vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. As I think about the power of our engagement together today, think about those words from Senator Booker, Professor Glaude, our panelists, your questions, your interaction. Today's also Tiger Ballot Day. Let us align that with our energy as well. And as you walk away, start your steps after this call where we started. Share with your family why you vote and why voting is important. Sometime before the weekend, grab one of those websites. Go take a look. Make your own voting plan. It's because we haven't had to do it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. There were those who paved the way for us not to have to do that. But it's our time now to do what they did before. Let's do that. Make a voting plan. As Tessa reminded us, look down the ballot. Andrea reminded us, look down the ballot. Figure out what else is on the ballot. Don't be surprised when you walk in there into the voting booth for early voting or you get the ballot in hand. Take a look. Figure out where your vote can make a difference and move change at the top of the ticket all the way down the ballot. This is our time and our conversation, ladies and gentlemen. We've been engaged, but let's continue the activation with action. If you have a question or you have a need, ask us. We're here. We've got a Facebook page or you've got our emails. Just let us know. But what we want you to know is that we make change together. As John Lewis would say, it's hashtag good trouble time. And that means vote. And as Craig Robinson says, that means vote. And as all my panelists will raise their hand and tingle their fingers up for me right now till we say to all of our folks on here, it means vote. We thank you, Princeton alumni. We thank you for the friends of our alumni. We thank you for our invited guests, for your presence, your perspective, and being on purpose with us to make change and lasting change happen. Blessings and stay great, Tigers. We love you.